Most people know the Daniel story the same way. A man gets thrown into a pit full of lions, he survives the night, the king pulls him out the next morning, everyone cheers, God is good, end of story. That's the version on the Sunday school flannel board. That's the version in the children's Bible with the cartoon lions that look more like golden retrievers than anything that could actually kill you. And look, that version isn't wrong, that's actually what happened. But here's what I want to ask you today. Did you know the story keeps going after that? Not for a verse or two. It keeps going in a direction that most people never talk about. And when you see where it actually lands, the whole story reads differently. The survival part, Daniel walking out of that den alive, that's not the point of the story. That's the setup. What comes after is where it gets interesting. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes. We're going to read this thing the whole way through, slow enough to actually see what's there. Before we get into the story, let me ask you something. When you think about Daniel in the lion's den, what do you think the story is teaching? Most people say something like, stay faithful even when things get hard and God will protect you. That's a reasonable reading. It's not inaccurate. But if that's all the story is, a lesson about personal faith and protection, then why does the book of Daniel spend so much space on what happens to the people who set the trap in the first place? Why does the story spend time on the king, what he does, what he says, how he changes? And why does the story end not with Daniel, but with a decree that goes out across an entire empire? See, when you read the whole thing, it starts to look less like a personal survival story and more like a story about how power shifts when someone refuses to compromise. That's a bigger idea than just God protected Daniel. Let's walk through it from the beginning. To understand this story, you need a little background on who Daniel was and what kind of situation he was living in. Daniel was a Jewish man living in Babylon. He wasn't there by choice. He was taken from Jerusalem as a young man when the Babylonian Empire conquered Judah. That's the starting point for the entire book of Daniel, a conquered people living under foreign rule, trying to figure out how to hold on to who they are while operating inside a system that doesn't share their values. Daniel was selected, along with a small group of other young men, to be trained for service in the royal court. The idea was to take promising people from conquered nations and essentially groom them to serve the empire. And Daniel was good at it. The book describes him as exceptionally capable, someone with a sharp mind, good judgment, and the ability to interpret things others couldn't make sense of. He worked his way up. Under multiple kings across decades, Daniel kept rising in rank and influence. By the time we get to Daniel chapter 6, which is where the lion's den story happens, Daniel is an old man. He's been in Babylon most of his life. And a new king, Darius the Mede, has just taken power. Darius looks at Daniel and essentially says, I want to put this man in charge of the whole kingdom. Not a department, not a region, the whole operation. And that's when the problems start. The other administrators and officials in the kingdom are not happy about this. And here's the thing, the text is pretty straightforward about why. It wasn't policy disagreements, it wasn't that Daniel was bad at the job. They were looking for grounds to bring a complaint against Daniel regarding his administration of the kingdom, but they couldn't find anything. The text says he was trustworthy, not corrupt, not negligent. So they couldn't go after his work performance, they had to go after something else, and they landed on his religion. They knew Daniel prayed 3 times a day facing Jerusalem. He had done it his whole life, openly, consistently. It wasn't a secret. So they went to King Darius with a proposal. King, you should issue a decree that for the next 30 days, anyone who prays to any god or man except you should be thrown into the lion's den. This will demonstrate your authority and unite the kingdom. And Darius, who apparently didn't see where this was going, signed it into law. Under Persian law, once the king signed a decree like that, it couldn't be revoked, not even by the king himself. The trap was set. So what does Daniel do when he finds out the decree has been signed? He goes home, opens the windows of his upper room towards Jerusalem, gets down on his knees, and prays 3 times, same as always. No dramatic gesture, no protest, no announcement. He just kept doing what he had always done. The officials were watching. They caught him. They went straight to the king. Daniel, one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you or your decree. He's still praying 3 times a day. And here's a detail that's easy to miss. The king was upset, not with Daniel, with himself. The text says he was deeply distressed and spent the rest of the day trying to find a legal way to rescue Daniel. He didn't want to go through with it. He had been played and he knew it. But his own officials kept the pressure on. You signed the decree, king. It can't be changed. Persian law. So Darius had no legal option. He gave the order. Daniel was brought and thrown into the lion's den. And the king said something to Daniel right before the stone was sealed over the entrance. He said, "May your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you." That's not the statement of a man who thinks this is fine. That's a man who is genuinely hoping for something he can't control. The stone is sealed. The king goes back to his palace. And then the story does something unusual. It doesn't cut to Daniel. It doesn't describe what's happening in the den. Instead, it follows the king. Darius went back to the palace and spent the night fasting. No food was brought to him, no entertainment. He couldn't sleep. That's where the camera stays, on the king sitting awake in his palace through the night, waiting to find out what happened to a man he didn't want to condemn. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and went to the lion's den, and he called out, the text says in an anguished voice, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions?" And Daniel answered, "May the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, your majesty." Daniel was alive. No injuries, nothing. The king was overjoyed. He gave the order to lift Daniel out of the den. All right, this is where the story usually ends in the children's version. Daniel is out. He's fine. God came through. Roll credits. But the story in Daniel chapter 6 keeps going, and what happens next is something most people have genuinely never paid attention to. What happened to the men who set the trap? The king gave a command. The men who had accused Daniel, and this is the part that surprises people, were brought and thrown into the lion's den. Not just them, their wives and their children too. And the text says matter-of-factly that before they even reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them. Now, I'm not going to editorialize that. The text doesn't ask you to feel a specific way about it. It just states what happened. But understand what this detail is doing in the story. The same pit that was supposed to be Daniel's execution became the fate of the people who designed it. The trap that was built specifically to destroy one man destroyed the people who built it instead. That's not a coincidence in the narrative. That's the story making a deliberate point about how this kind of scheme ends. But here's the part that really gets overlooked. After all of that, after Daniel is out, after the officials are dealt with, King Darius writes a letter. And this letter goes out to every nation, every people, every language group in the entire kingdom. This wasn't a small audience. The Persian Empire at this point covered a massive portion of the known world. Darius was writing to everyone under his authority. And what did he write? He wrote, essentially, a declaration about Daniel's God. He said, "I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and revere the God of Daniel, for he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions." Read that again slowly. A Persian king, a polytheist, ruling the most powerful empire in the world, just sent an empire-wide decree telling every nation under his rule to respect the God of a Jewish exile because of one night in a lion's den. That's not a small thing. That's the most powerful man in the world changing his public posture toward the God of a people he conquered because of what he personally witnessed. And that's what the story is building toward. Not just Daniel's survival. The survival was the event. The decree was the result. Think about the original audience reading this story. Jewish people living under foreign rule, wondering if their faith meant anything in the context of empire, wondering if staying faithful was worth it when the system around them kept rewarding people who compromised. And into that context comes a story that says, one man held his position, didn't argue, didn't protest, didn't negotiate, just kept doing what he had always done. And the outcome wasn't just that he personally survived. The outcome was that the most powerful king in the world issued a decree across the entire empire about the God of that man served. That's the ending. Not Daniel walking out of the den. That's the middle. The ending is the decree. So what do we do with this? I think there are a few things worth sitting with. Daniel wasn't thrown to the lions because he did something dramatic. He was thrown in because he kept doing the same quiet thing he had always done, praying 3 times a day, even when it became illegal.